Have you ever noticed your dog barking at an empty corner of the room? Or your cat suddenly hissing at nothing, their fur standing on end, eyes locked on something you can see? Most people dismiss it as just animal behavior. Maybe they heard a strange noise or caught an unfamiliar scent. But what if I told you that in many Asian cultures, animals, especially dogs and cats, are believed to have the ability to see things that we can't? They can sense spirits, detect negative energy, and feel the presence of the supernatural long before humans ever realize something is wrong. Tonight, I'm going to share with you two disturbing true stories from Asia about people who ignored their pets' warnings. And in both cases, they learned the hard way that when your pet is trying to tell you something, you should listen. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Spirits of Asia. I'm your narrator, and tonight we're exploring why you should never ignore your pet's warnings. Let's dive right into our first story. Our first story was shared by a woman in Thailand. Let's call her Nok. Nok lived in a small apartment in Bangkok with her boyfriend, Chai, and their dog, a medium-sized mixed breed named Lucky. Lucky had been with Nok for about 5 years, ever since she found him abandoned on the street as a puppy. He was a loyal, friendly dog who rarely barked and got along with everyone. He was the kind of dog who would wag his tail at strangers and loved being petted by anyone who walked by. Nok and Chai had been living together for about 2 years at the time of this story. Their apartment was on the 3rd floor of an older building, nothing fancy, but it was affordable and close to Chai's workplace. The building was a bit run down, with narrow hallways and flickering fluorescent lights, but the rent was cheap and the landlord didn't ask too many questions. Life was simple and peaceful, until one day when everything changed. It started about 3 months after they moved in. One evening, Nok was cooking dinner in the kitchen, while Chai was watching TV in the living room. Lucky was lying on his mat near the balcony door, relaxed and half asleep as usual. But then, without warning, Lucky suddenly sat up. His ears perked up, and he stared intensely at the corner of the living room near the front door. Nok glanced over and noticed that Lucky's body had gone completely stiff. His tail was no longer wagging. Instead, it was tucked low, almost between his legs. Then slowly, a low growl began to rumble from his throat. It was a sound Nok had never heard from him before. "Lucky, what's wrong?" Nok called out, but Lucky didn't respond. He just kept staring at that corner, growling, his eyes locked on something Nok couldn't see. The Chai looked over from the couch and laughed. What's wrong with him? Maybe he saw a gecko or something. Nok wasn't so sure. The way Lucky was acting didn't seem normal. His whole body was tense, trembling slightly, and his growl grew louder and more aggressive. Then, suddenly, he started barking. Loud, sharp barks that echoed through the apartment. "Lucky, stop!" Nok shouted, but Lucky ignored her. He continued barking at the empty corner, refusing to move, refusing to look away. After a few minutes, Lucky finally stopped barking, but he didn't relax. He stayed in that same tense position, staring at the corner, breathing heavily. Nok walked over and tried to pet him to calm him down, but the moment she got close, Lucky flinched and backed away from her, still staring at the corner. That night, Lucky refused to sleep in his usual spot. Instead, he stayed near Nok and Chai's bedroom door, lying down but never fully relaxing. His eyes kept darting toward the living room, as if he was keeping watch. The strange behavior continued over the following days. Every evening, around the same time, Lucky would start growling and barking at that same corner. Sometimes he would bark for a few minutes. Other times it would last for nearly an hour. Nok and Chai tried everything. They checked the corner for insects, cracks in the wall, anything that might be causing Lucky to react this way. But there was nothing. Just an empty corner. Chai started getting annoyed. "I can't deal with this every night," he complained one evening. "Maybe we should take him to the vet. But nothing might be wrong with him." Nok agreed. So the next day, she took Lucky to a local veterinary clinic. The vet examined him thoroughly, checked his eyes, ears, and behavior, but found nothing wrong. "He's perfectly healthy," the vet said. "Maybe he's just stressed about something. Try giving him more exercise and see if that helps." But more exercise didn't help. The barking continued. In fact, it got worse. One night, Nok woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of Lucky barking frantically. She sat up in bed and saw that Chai was also awake, looking annoyed. "Can you please do something about him?" Chai muttered. Nok got out of bed and walked into the living room. Lucky was standing in the middle of the room, barking at the corner again, but this time he looked terrified. His whole body was shaking, and his tail was tucked so far between his legs that it was almost touching his stomach. Nok tried to approach him, but Lucky suddenly bolted toward her and started pulling at her pajama pants with his teeth, trying to drag her back toward the bedroom. "Lucky, stop," Nok said, pulling her leg away. But Lucky wouldn't stop. He kept pulling, whining, barking, as if he was desperately trying to get her away from the living room. Finally, Nok gave up and went back to the bedroom. As soon as she stepped inside, Lucky stopped pulling and sat down in the doorway, staring back into the living room, still on high alert. The next morning, Nok decided to ask the neighbors if they had noticed anything strange in the building. She knocked on the door of the apartment next to hers, where an elderly woman lived. The woman opened the door and smiled warmly. "Oh, hello dear. How can I help you?" Nok explained the situation, how her dog had been acting strangely, barking at the corner every night. She asked if the woman had heard anything unusual, or if she knew of any history about the building. The woman's smile faded. She glanced down the hallway, then back at Nok. "You live in Unit 302, right?" Nok nodded. The woman sighed. "You should be careful in that unit. A few years ago, a man lived there alone. One night, he hanged himself in the living room, near the front door, I think. He found him a few days later." Nok's stomach dropped. The same corner Lucky had been barking at. "Did anyone else live there after him?" Nok asked, her voice shaking. The woman shook her head. "Takeshita Farzapul. A couple tried to move in about a year ago, but they only lasted 2 weeks. They said they kept hearing strange noises at night. Footsteps, knocking, things like that. They left in a hurry and never came back. After that, the landlord had trouble renting it out until you and your boyfriend moved in." Nok thanked the woman and went back to her apartment. She told Chai everything, but he just laughed it off. "Come on, Nok. You're not seriously believing in ghost stories, are you? The dog is just being weird. We'll get used to it." But Nok couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. That night, she decided to do something. She went to a nearby temple and spoke with a monk. She explained the situation, and the monk gave her a small blessed amulet and a bundle of incense. "Bring this home," the monk said. "Light the incense in every room, especially near the area where your dog is reacting. If there is a spirit, this will help calm it." That evening, Nok lit the incense in the living room, focusing especially on the corner near the front door. Lucky watched her closely, but for the first time in weeks, he didn't bark. Instead, he sat quietly, his eyes still fixed on the corner, but his body was more relaxed. For the next few nights, Lucky didn't bark at all. Nok thought maybe the monk's advice had worked. But then, one night, everything changed. Nok woke up around 3 a.m. to the sound of scratching. It was coming from the living room. She sat up in bed, listening carefully. The scratching continued, slow and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood. She got out of bed and walked toward the living room. Lucky was standing near the bedroom door, but this time, he wasn't barking. He was just staring into the living room, his body completely still, his ears flat against his head. Nok turned on the light. The living room was empty, but then she noticed something. The front door was slightly open, just a crack, but enough for someone to see through. Nok's heart started pounding. She was sure she had locked it before going to bed. She walked over and closed the door, locking it tightly. But as she turned around, she saw something that made her blood run cold. On the wall near the corner, there were scratch marks. Long, deep scratches, as if someone had dragged their nails down the wall. Naka screamed. Chai came running out of the bedroom. What's wrong?" Naka pointed at the wall. Chai stared at the scratches, his face going pale. "We need to leave," Nak said, her voice trembling. Now, they packed their things that same night and left the apartment. They never went back. Lucky never barked at empty corners again. Let's move on to our second story for tonight. This one was shared by a man in Hong Kong. Let's call him Wing. Wing lived alone in a small flat in Kowloon with his cat, a black and white female named Mew Mew. Mew Mew was about 3 years old at the time, and she was a quiet, independent cat who spent most of her time sleeping or sitting by the window watching the street below. Wing had adopted her from a shelter 2 years earlier, and she had always been calm and well behaved. But one day, Miu's behavior changed completely. Started one evening when Wing came home from work. As soon as he opened the door, Miu, who usually greeted him by rubbing against his legs, instead bolted past him and ran into the hallway outside the flat. Wing called out to her, but she didn't come back. He stepped into the hallway and saw her sitting near the elevator, staring at his front door. Her back was arched, her fur was standing on end, and she was hissing. "Case. Miu, what's wrong?" Wing asked, walking toward her. But the moment he got close, she hissed louder and backed away, her eyes still locked on the door. Wing looked back at his flat. The door was open, and inside everything looked normal. There was no one there, no strange sounds, no movement, just his empty flat. After a few minutes, Wing managed to coax Miu back inside, but she refused to go near the living room. Instead, she stayed in the bedroom, hiding under the bed. This continued for several days. Every time Wing came home, Miu would hiss at the front door and refuse to enter the flat until he practically carried her inside. And once inside, she would immediately run to the bedroom and hide. Wing started to worry. He took Miu to the vet, thinking maybe she was sick or in pain. But the vet found nothing wrong. "She's perfectly healthy," the vet said. "Maybe she's just stressed. Try giving her some time." But time didn't help. In fact, things got worse. One night, Wing woke up to the sound of Miu yowling. It was a loud, desperate sound, unlike anything he had ever heard from her before. He sat up in bed and saw Miu standing on the dresser near the bedroom door, her fur completely puffed up, her eyes wide and wild. She was staring at the doorway, yowling non-stop. Wing turned on the light and looked at the doorway. There was nothing there. "Miu, stop," Wing said. But she didn't stop. She kept yowling, her whole body trembling. Then suddenly, she jumped off the dresser and ran toward Wing, leaping onto the bed and pressing herself against his chest, still staring at the doorway. Wing felt a chill run down his spine. He looked at the doorway again, and this time, he felt it, a presence, something cold, something wrong. He grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, shining it toward the doorway. Nothing. But the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, Wing decided to ask his neighbor, an older woman who had lived in the building for decades, if she knew anything about his flat. When he described what had been happening, the woman's expression changed. "Your flat?" she said slowly. "A woman died there, about 5 years ago. She lived alone. They found her after a few weeks. The smell was terrible." Wing felt his stomach turn. "How did she die?" The woman hesitated. "I don't know the details, but I heard she was very depressed. Some people say she ended her own life." After that conversation, Wing knew he had to do something. He went to a nearby temple and asked for help. A Taoist priest agreed to come to his flat to perform a cleansing ritual. The priest arrived the next evening, carrying a bag of ritual items. He lit incense, chanted prayers, and walked through every room of the flat, paying special attention to the living room and the front door. Miu watched from the bedroom, still hiding under the bed. After the ritual was complete, the priest turned to Wing. "There was a spirit here," he said. "A woman. She was very sad, very lonely. I have helped guide her away, but you should be respectful. Burn incense regularly and keep your home clean." That night, for the first time in weeks, Miu didn't hiss at the door. She walked calmly into the living room, sniffed around, and then curled up on the couch. She was finally at peace, and so was Wing. Now, I want to take some time to talk about why animals, especially dogs and cats, are believed to have the ability to sense spirits and paranormal activity. This belief isn't unique to Asia. Cultures all over the world have long held the idea that animals can see and feel things that humans cannot. But in Asian spiritual traditions, this belief is particularly strong and deeply rooted in religious and cultural practices. In Thai Buddhism, for example, dogs are often seen as spiritually sensitive creatures. There are countless stories of dogs barking at empty spaces in homes where people later discover that someone had died or that the property has a dark history. Monks and spiritual practitioners in Thailand will often observe the behavior of animals, especially dogs, when performing blessings or cleansings on properties. If a dog refuses to enter a room or continuously barks at a specific area, It's taken as a sign that negative energy or a spirit is present. Cats, on the other hand, hold a particularly interesting place in Chinese and Hong Kong folklore. In traditional Chinese beliefs, cats are thought to have the ability to see yin energy, which is the cold, dark, and passive energy associated with death and the spirit world. This is why, in some old superstitions, people would never allow a cat near a dead body, because it was believed that if a cat jumped over a corpse, the body could reanimate or the spirit could become restless. But beyond superstition, there is actually some scientific reasoning behind why animals might react to things we can't perceive. Dogs and cats have far superior senses compared to humans. Dogs can hear frequencies as high as 65,000 Hz, while humans can only hear up to about 20,000 Hz. This means dogs can detect sounds that are completely inaudible to us. Similarly, cats have incredible night vision and can see in light levels 6 times lower than what a human needs. They also have an extremely sensitive sense of smell and can detect pheromones and chemical changes in the environment that we would never notice. So when your dog starts barking at a corner where nothing seems to be there, it could be reacting to a high-frequency sound, maybe from electrical wiring, plumbing, or even ultrasonic pest deterrents. When your cat suddenly stares at a dark hallway with its fur standing on end, it might be seeing shadows or movements that are invisible to the human eye in low-light conditions. But here's the thing. In both of the stories I shared tonight, the animals weren't just reacting to random stimuli. Their behavior was consistent, targeted, and prolonged. Lucky, the dog in the first story barked at the same corner every single night for weeks. Mew Mew, the cat in the second story, refused to enter the flat and hid under the bed for days. This kind of sustained, intense reaction suggests that they were responding to something more than just a strange sound or shadow, and in both cases, once the spiritual cleansing was performed, the animals immediately returned to normal behavior. This can't be easily explained away by environmental factors alone. In many Asian households, when a pet begins acting strangely, especially if that behavior is directed toward a specific location or occurs at specific times, the family will often consult with a spiritual practitioner. This could be a Buddhist monk, a Taoist priest, a feng shui master, or even a medium. These practitioners will typically perform some form of cleansing ritual, which may include burning incense, chanting prayers, sprinkling blessed water, or placing protective talismans around the home. The goal is to either guide the spirit away peacefully, or to create a protective barrier that prevents negative energy from affecting the living. In Nock's case in the first story, the monk provided her with incense and an amulet, which temporarily calmed the activity, but the presence was strong enough that it eventually returned, and the scratches on the wall were a clear sign that the spirit was becoming more aggressive. That's why Nock and Chai ultimately decided to leave. Sometimes, no amount of cleansing can remove a spirit that is deeply attached to a location, especially if the death was traumatic or if the spirit is filled with anger or sorrow. In Wing's case, in the second story, the Taoist priest was able to successfully guide the spirit away. This suggests that the spirit was not malicious, just lost and lonely, which aligns with what the priest said about the woman who had died in the flat. She wasn't trying to harm anyone. She was simply still there, lingering in the space where she had spent her final moments. The cat's sensitivity to yin energy made Mew Mew aware of the spirit's presence long before Wing ever felt anything. So what can you learn from these two stories? First, pay attention to your pet's behavior. If your dog or cat suddenly starts acting strange, especially if that behavior is focused on a specific area of your home, don't just dismiss it as random animal behavior. Take note of when it happens, where it happens, and how long it lasts. If the behavior continues for days or weeks, consider investigating further. Ask your neighbors about the history of your home. Do some research. You might uncover something that explains what your pet is reacting to. Second, trust your instincts. In both stories tonight, the owners initially tried to rationalize what was happening. They took their pets to the vet, checked for logical explanations, and tried to dismiss the idea that something supernatural might be involved. But deep down, they knew something was wrong. If you feel that uncomfortable, unexplainable sense of dread or unease in your home, especially if your pet is also reacting, don't ignore it. Third, don't be afraid to seek help. Whether you believe in spirits or not, there are people who specialize in dealing with these situations. In many Asian communities, Spiritual practitioners are readily available and willing to help. A simple cleansing ritual can bring peace of mind, and in many cases, it can genuinely resolve the issue. And finally, respect the unseen. In Asian cultures, there is a deep respect for the spirit world. We understand that not everything can be seen or explained, and we acknowledge that the dead deserve to be treated with compassion and dignity. If you live in a place where someone has died, especially if the death was tragic, take a moment to show respect. Light some incense, say a quiet prayer, or simply acknowledge their presence with kindness. You don't have to be religious or spiritual to do this. It's just about showing basic human decency, even to those who are no longer with us. Animals have been our companions for thousands of years. They protect us, comfort us, and in many ways they understand the world in ways that we never will. So the next time your dog barks at an empty corner, or your cat stares intensely at something you can see, don't just brush it off. Pause, observe, and listen. Because they might be trying to warn you about something you can see yet, something that you need to know. Never ignore your pet's warnings. They might just save your life.